Despite having died in 1860, Arthur Schopenhauer's star burns brightly. This once obscure, pessimist philosopher is enjoying prolific global attention, and not just amongst academics and students of philosophy or European history. Collectives as diverse as self-help groups, men's rights movements, end-of-times doomsayers, and even white supremacy provocateurs are claiming and quoting him. Schopenhauer was a tossed salad philosopher, referencing Hindu and Buddhist concepts, mathematics, eugenics, gender politics, and even magic and parapsychology. Yet his confronting, often controversial ideas can offer us fascinating insights into the nature of reality, the human condition, and the limits of intellect. As an author, he introduced Asian wisdom to many Europeans and profoundly influenced later thinkers. But did he himself truly get ancient Eastern thought? What did this belatedly influential, brilliant mind claim he'd discovered? And why has Arthur Schopenhauer suddenly gone viral across the 21st century's internet? Consider the endless cycle of human desire. We want something, we strive for it, perhaps we achieve it. But soon, a new desire emerges, or boredom arises. Like the Buddha, millennia before him, Schopenhauer saw suffering not as an occasional visitor, but as our constant companion in life. This cycle, he argued, is driven by that relentless, impersonal will. He saw it as an inevitable consequence of being alive. And by understanding the root of our suffering, the insatiable will, Schopenhauer believed we could find a path to a kind of peace. Arthur Schopenhauer was no overnight sensation in the philosophical world. In fact, during much of his career, his works were largely ignored. Yet today, a few of his more outrageous statements, often quoted without admitting his evolving thoughts on those hot topics, fuel animated online debates. Schopenhauer is often curated, favorite selections including his provocative descriptions of women, who in one essay he called childish, frivolous and short-sighted. But Arthur's views were as complex as he was. He also called women decidedly more sober in their judgment than we are, more sympathetic to the suffering of others. While some now appropriate or repurpose his comments about women, the truth about how he truly perceived them is more complicated than blunt, harsh maxims. For when Schopenhauer sat for a sculpture portrait by young Elisabeth Ney in 1859, he marveled at her wit, independence, and precision skill as a visual artist. He later mused, "I believe that if a woman succeeds in withdrawing from the mass, or rather raising herself above it, she grows ceaselessly and more than a man." This tells us that if one is going to quote Schopenhauer on hot topics with any degree of integrity, a wide reading and acknowledging of his views is mandatory. Arthur Schopenhauer entered the world in Danzig in 1788. His family background was one of considerable wealth. His father, Heinrich Floris Schopenhauer, was a successful businessman. Johanna Schopenhauer, his mother, was a notable novelist and essayist. A pivotal event in Arthur's youth was the death of his father in 1805. This loss undoubtedly had a deep and lasting impact on him. The family subsequently moved to Weimar, a vibrant cultural hub. Early life travels, initiated by his father, had already shaped Arthur. He'd spent significant time in France and England, keenly observing their societies. Following his father's death, Arthur briefly undertook an apprenticeship in a Hamburg business, but found the world of trade utterly unfulfilling. In 1809, Schopenhauer enrolled at the University of Göttingen, and after initially pursuing studies in medicine, in a fateful decision, pivoted to philosophy. After Göttingen, Schopenhauer moved to the University of Berlin in 1811. Here, the dominant philosophical voice was Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Schopenhauer attended some of Hegel's lectures but found himself profoundly disagreeing with Hegelian idealism. Instead, he delved deeper into his preferred thinkers, like Plato and Kant. He also encountered translations of ancient Indian philosophical texts, which had a profound impact on him. Thus, several diverse influences began to coalesce, and over time, the central concept of his philosophy, the will, began to take shape. In 1813, he received his doctorate from the University of Jena. But alongside his studies, Schopenhauer's philosophical development was deeply intertwined with his personal observations and experiences. The premature death of his father gave him an early, harsh lesson in loss. His extensive travels exposed him to the full spectrum of human conditions. As a result, he developed a keen eye for human nature, observing the powerful drives of egoism and self-interest, and their often devastating effects. These observations, and the conclusions he drew from them, contrasted sharply with the generally optimistic philosophies popular at the time. And Schopenhauer's own temperament, inclined towards introspection and melancholy, resonated with the starker realities of life, rather than utopian hopes and dreams. Those early years, studies, and personal traits laid the essential groundwork for his major philosophical work, The World as Will and Representation. Its first edition was published in late 1818, and though only 30 years old at the time, Arthur considered it his definitive statement. He believed it contained profound truths about the very nature of existence, and he would later maintain that all his subsequent writings were simply elaborations. Despite being the fruit of solitary reflection and intense study, the book's arrival in the philosophical world was met with a deafening silence and few sales. Schopenhauer's ideas were radically different and challenged the prevailing optimistic and rationalist views, which were popular even beyond academic circles. Arthur found himself largely ignored by the established philosophical community, and this lack of recognition was a source of great bitterness for him. His book was undeniably grand in its ambition, for in it, Schopenhauer had, somewhat astonishingly, attempted to provide a complete explanation of reality. He divided his analysis into two fundamental aspects. First, the world as representation, how we perceive and experience the world. Second, the world as will, the underlying force that drives all things. These two pillars form the foundation of his entire philosophical system. He stated, somewhat provocatively, that all previous philosophy had failed to grasp the ultimate truth because it had misunderstood the world's inner nature. Schopenhauer believed his system was the revelation that tied everything together, the profound insight that would show humanity the true springs of its actions. And perhaps, he also maintained, the true source of its pervasive sorrows. He saw the world, our reality, as something far more fluid. Schopenhauer began his masterwork with a bold statement: "The world is my representation," an idea which draws heavily from the works of Immanuel Kant. Kant had distinguished between the world as it appears to us, phenomena, and the world as it is in itself, noumena. Schopenhauer embraced Kant's distinction. Hence, long before the Matrix movies, first Kant, then Schopenhauer, argued that the world we experience is not the ultimate reality, but just a construct of our minds. Shaped as it is by our intellect, our senses, and our personal limitations, the world we experience may be what we see, but we can't see things as they really are. Rather, we see them as our cognitive faculties render them to us, like someone wearing colored glasses. If their lenses are blue, everything appears blue. Our senses and intellect also act as lenses, which filter and structure reality. Space, time, and causality, Schopenhauer argued, are all forms of our perception. They are not inherent properties of the world in itself, but the framework through which we apprehend everything. This is the representation aspect of his philosophy. The world we navigate daily is a world of appearances, a complex tapestry woven by our own minds. Schopenhauer often invoked the Hindu concept of Maya, which refers to the illusion or deceptive appearance of this world. He saw a deep parallel here. The world of individual things, of separate objects and events, is part of this veil of Maya, which is the world as representation. Intellect is designed for practical purposes. It helps us navigate this world of appearances. It aids survival. But intellect alone can't grasp underlying truth. In fact, useful as it is, intellect, when relied upon, keeps us trapped in a world of multiplicity and division. This understanding has profound implications. If the world we know is a mere representation, then what lies beyond it? What is the non-representational thing in itself that Immanuel Kant spoke of? Schopenhauer believed he had found the answer. He argued that to get there, we must first acknowledge the limits of our perception. We must, he said, come to understand that our notion of everyday reality is conditioned by what? By the very structure of our own consciousness. In Schopenhauer's philosophical unfolding, reaching this understanding was the first essential step, one which prepares us for the revelation of the will. In peering behind the curtain, so to speak, Schopenhauer aimed to glimpse the unseen cosmic intention. If the world we experience is only a representation, what is its underlying essence? Schopenhauer's startling answer to that was the will, by which he meant not some individual, conscious will, like the one we operate when we decide to act, but a far more fundamental, primal, and potent force. Schopenhauer calls it a ceaseless, blind, irrational striving, an aimless urge to exist, to manifest, to live. This will, he argues, is Kant's thing in itself. It is the ultimate reality underpinning all phenomena, the hidden engine driving the entire cosmos, and we can gain insight into this will via looking inward. Now, anyone conversant with ancient Eastern wisdom will rightly point out that what Schopenhauer felt he had stumbled upon had already been discussed for millennia. For his concept of the world as a distracting representation closely aligns with ancient Chinese sage Lao Tzu's description of what blinds us, the 10,000 things. And Arthur's The Will sounds suspiciously like that great, all-influencing, yet ultimately unnameable cosmic one life the Tao Te Ching discusses using poetry. But back to Schopenhauer's look inward directive. What did he mean? That our own bodies offer a direct window through which we may glimpse that thing in itself. When we experience thirst, hunger, or sexual desire, we are actually feeling the will directly. These needs don't simply spring from our rational decisions. They are powerful, often overwhelming urges arising from deep within us. And, Arthur maintained, such inner influences offer insights into the will's nature. Our conscious intellect may try to rationalize these drives, but they are primordial and expressions of that fundamental cosmic force operating inside us. This will is not limited to humans or animals, but permeates everything in existence. It is latent in the growth of a plant, even in the force of gravity. It dwells in lightning and reactions between chemicals. In fact, all natural laws and forces, Schopenhauer asserted, are manifestations of this one, singular will. The world of representation shows us a multitude of individual things, yet behind this veil of Maya exists actually only one, undifferentiated, striving will. This will is the inner life of the universe itself, constantly creating, pushing, and destroying, and characterized by its lack of ultimate purpose and endlessness. In proclaiming that this will strives for striving's sake, Schopenhauer was at odds with Taoist, Hindu, and Buddhist thought, which recognizes a cosmic purpose. Though most Eastern schools said this cosmic purpose was beyond the rational mind, they conceded its existence and taught practices aimed at finding harmony with it. Schopenhauer, however, declared that the will knows no final goal or ultimate satisfaction. Once one manifestation is achieved, it immediately seeks another. That alleged insight, was Arthur's crucial break with all positive philosophical theories, and is essential to our understanding of his now famous pessimism. If, as he claimed, all fundamental reality is insatiable, endless striving, then what does that mean for our lives? How is lasting peace and contentment possible? And it's perhaps somewhat ironic that a thinker so impressed by Eastern ideas would see the very fabric of existence as woven from this unfulfillable, relentless urge. It has led some subsequent philosophers to propose that Schopenhauer initially took the right track with his ideas, but was derailed by his own melancholic nature. But the plot thickens when we examine Schopenhauer's assertions about the source of all human suffering, for in them he suddenly waxes quite Buddhist. Yet it is not ancient sutras, but Schopenhauer's core concept of the will itself that directly underpins his famous doctrine of suffering. His view is that since life is fundamentally an expression of a blind, insatiable will, suffering is not accidental but the inevitable consequence of existence. The will constantly impels us to desire things. We chase after goals, possessions, relationships. We believe achieving these desires will bring lasting happiness. However, like the Buddha, Schopenhauer argues that this is just another illusion. Any satisfaction we gain is merely temporary, just a brief pause before some new desire emerges, to propel, then ultimately frustrate us, ensuring an endless cycle. We desire, we strive, we achieve, perhaps, and thus feel fleeting satisfaction. Then, almost immediately, boredom sets in, or a new desire replaces the old one. We're like hamsters in a wheel. We are constantly running, but never truly arriving at a state of permanent peace. Schopenhauer also compared human life to a pendulum. It swings back and forth between boredom and pain. Pain from unfulfilled desires, boredom from when desires are temporarily sated, leaving a void, an emptiness. And after contemplating the nature of pleasure itself, Schopenhauer viewed most pleasures negatively, as just the fleeting cessation of a pain or a want. The pleasure of eating comes from the pain of hunger. The pleasure of rest comes from the pain of exhaustion. True, positive, lasting happiness, he argued, is rare. Life is predominantly characterized by want, struggle, and dissatisfaction. This is because the will, by its very nature, is erratic, so can never be fully satisfied. As you can tell, Arthur Schopenhauer was not exactly the kind of thinker and conversationalist that most people would describe as enormous fun at parties. But he didn't share this dour analysis of suffering simply to be depressing. For Schopenhauer, it was a necessary and realistic assessment of the human condition. He believed that confronting the root cause of suffering, the will, was crucial, because only by recognizing its relentless nature could we begin to deal with it. Hiding from this truth, pretending life is otherwise, only leads to further disappointment, and philosophy should confront the hard reality of our inner lives. So, he saw the will as the engine, and suffering as its constant exhaust. But did he also, like the Buddha and Lao Tzu, conceive of an upside or path to inner harmony? Schopenhauer did not leave humanity entirely without hope. He suggested pathways to alleviate suffering, though hardly conventional paths to happiness. His answer was to find ways to achieve detachment from the will, for surely quieting the will could bring peace. Detachment is also an ancient Eastern idea, but Schopenhauer then narrowed his focus to align with particular Eastern schools by naming two primary avenues: aesthetic contemplation and ascetic denial. The first, he said, was via the experience of art and beauty. Through that, one could momentarily forget personal desires and bathe in pure, will-less knowledge. For in such moments, we are no longer driven by the will. Music to Schopenhauer was the highest of all arts. It could provide a profound, albeit temporary, escape. Arthur's aesthetic contemplation aligns with the Taoist and Zen Buddhist views that nature, music, art, calligraphy, even tea can become portals to awakening. Schopenhauer's far more gritty second path was asceticism, or the denial of the will. Since craving binds us to suffering, one should renounce worldly desires. This path is inspired by certain Eastern traditions and has echoes in Christian mysticism, with practices like body denial or mortification of the flesh. Think traditions like celibacy, poverty, fasting, and compassion. The core idea is that through self-denial, one can progressively weaken the hold of the will. True saints and bodhisattvas, history tells us, achieved willlessness and personal will-lessness. But this, of course, is not an easy nor an appealing path for most. It's worth observing that the Buddha fiercely practiced asceticism for years, but ultimately abandoned it, before later becoming enlightened, without its assistance. And though asceticism was prevalent among the Jews of Jesus' time, his teachings focused on internal spirituality, compassion, forgiveness, and harmony with God. While Arthur recommended a tough traditional ascetic path, as found in some Hindu sects, along with pursuing immense self-discipline, he also emphasized compassion. He wrote that by recognizing all beings as manifestations of that same suffering will, empathy would arise, which could help us transcend our own egoistic concerns. Academic circles largely ignored Schopenhauer's first round of challenging ideas, and his mixed bag of mystical wisdom and logical reasoning. But in 1851, he published Parerga and Paralipomena. Its sharp wit and clear prose captivated a broader audience, and it became a surprise bestseller. Suddenly, the philosopher who had toiled in obscurity found himself a celebrated figure. The dawn of his recognition had finally and decisively broken. Schopenhauer's ideas were destined to resonate with another great philosopher. Friedrich Nietzsche was profoundly influenced by Schopenhauer. As a young student, he discovered Schopenhauer's work in a second-hand bookshop. This encounter was transformative, awakening his intellectual spirit. Schopenhauer's ideas on the will and his pessimism resonated deeply with Nietzsche. Nietzsche celebrated Schopenhauer in his essay, Schopenhauer as Educator. Eventually, Nietzsche proposed his own concept of the will to power, and amid later favorable critiques, he always acknowledged his debt to Schopenhauer. In delving into the unconscious in his books, Schopenhauer also became Freud's precursor. Long before Sigmund Freud, Schopenhauer had explored similar terrain. Schopenhauer emphasized the primacy of the will over the intellect. He saw the intellect as a servant to hidden desires of the will. Daringly for his time, he wrote about unconscious drives and sexual desire. Groundbreakingly, he asserted that human motivation springs from sources beneath conscious awareness. The parallels between Schopenhauer's and Freud's motivations are striking. Both reference a primal, irrational dimension to the psyche. As it later turned out, Freud conceded that Schopenhauer anticipated many of his own ideas. For all his apparent contradictions, Schopenhauer's exploration of the non-rational aspects of human nature helped create an intellectual climate of bold inquiry. Thus, his shadow looms large over the landscape of modern psychological thought. Literary landscapes and artistic visions were also a part of Schopenhauer's worldview. Schopenhauer's philosophy resonated deeply with writers, artists, and musicians. His focus on the emotional dimensions of human experience offered rich thematic material. Artists often grapple with themes of suffering, desire, and struggle. Schopenhauer offered a philosophical framework that validated their intuitions. Many great novelists show the signs of Schopenhauer's influence. Richard Wagner's opera, Tristan und Isolde, embodies Schopenhauerian themes. Gustav Mahler's symphonies grapple with existential suffering and angst. Schopenhauer bestowed on artists a coherent philosophical system. His views left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape of an era. Schopenhauer's philosophy continues to resonate today for a number of reasons. For one thing, his work is now seen as a precursor to existentialism. Thinkers like Sartre and Camus echoed his concerns. Modern concepts like mindfulness share common ground with him, and his writings on compassion hold enduring power. So, coming full circle, why has Arthur Schopenhauer won such a huge audience online today, despite his less than sunny disposition? In part, maybe because his warnings about the consequences of representation, seeing what we want to see, not what is, unmask many modern relationships. Perhaps because major features of the 21st century, from our high-tech society's materially driven constructs to its often shameless lack of compassion, resonate in his writings. His analysis of insatiable desire and the transient nature of gratification totally nails our consumerist age, in which many grapple with deep dissatisfaction despite material abundance. Schopenhauer's philosophy speaks directly to this modern malaise, and his forthright "get real about reality" stance may be just the powerful self-reflective wake-up call our often self-deluding culture needs. Of his suggested fixes, solace through aesthetic contemplation gives a powerful antidote to daily stresses, and his calls for compassion offer a profound ethical guide for our challenging, interconnected world. The irony of Schopenhauer's legacy may be that it was his formidable intellect which exposed the limits of the human mind, yet itself stopped him short of embracing the alternate path of the mystic. Nonetheless, like Lao Tzu, the poetic ancient Chinese sage and founder of Taoism, the Buddha, who revealed the universality of human suffering millennia ago, and Jesus, who preached unconditional compassion as a bridge to the divine, Schopenhauer remains a provocative challenger, forcing us to confront essential, uncomfortable questions about not only what lies beyond the veil but also ourselves and our natures. While those ancient wisdom masters had more positives to offer, they would no doubt have supported Arthur's intellectual courage and fierce quest for the truth. Did you know the philosopher of pessimism before watching this? Which of his views do you agree or disagree with? Please tell us in the comments, and also like, subscribe and share to help others find their way to life class.
Schopenhauer's insights about the insatiable will are invaluable, and both Far Eastern and Middle Eastern sages have offered ways to uncouple from it, such as the compact approach revealed in episode 13.